7 days, one ultimatum. A chance encounter that changes everything. As two lives collide under impossible circumstances, can they uncover the meaning of love? Before we begin the story, comment below with the country you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the towering windows of the Prescott mansion, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Despite its grandeur, the house felt cold, a reflection of the strained relationships within. Mason Prescott stood by the fireplace, his hands clenched into fists as he glared at the man seated before him. His father, Victor Prescott, wheelchair-bound and wearing his signature icy expression, looked unbothered by the fury radiating from his son. Beside him stood Mr. Aldridge, a family lawyer who adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat as he opened a leather folder. "Mason?" Mr. Aldridge began, his tone professional but firm. "As per your father's revised will, there is a clause regarding his inheritance of the Prescott estate." Mason rolled his eyes, his frustration evident. "Get on with it," he snapped. Mr. Aldridge hesitated briefly before continuing. "You must be married by your 29th birthday to secure the inheritance. Since your birthday is a week from today, that gives you precisely 7 days to fulfill the condition. If you fail to do so, the entirety of the estate will be donated to charity." The room fell silent, the weight of the ultimatum settling heavy in the air. Mason stared at the lawyer, then at his father, disbelief quickly turning into anger. "This is insane!" Mason exploded, pacing back and forth. "You can't dictate my life like this. Marriage isn't something you can just rush into, especially not to keep some stupid inheritance." Victor's expression remained impassive as he spoke, his voice sharp and cold. "It's not just about money, Mason. It's about proving that you can take responsibility for something other than yourself, not that you're capable of making a serious commitment." Mason stopped pacing, his eyes blazing with resentment. "You think this is about responsibility? This is about control. You've been trying to control my life ever since I was a kid." Victor's lips curled into a faint, humorless smile. "And look how well you've done without it. Running around with no purpose, no ambition, living off the Prescott name. Do you think that's what your mother would have wanted for you?" At the mention of his late mother, Mason's jaw tightened, his anger threatening to boil over. "Don't you dare bring her into this," he said through gritted teeth. Sensing the tension escalating, Mr. Aldridge interjected. "Gentlemen, perhaps we could discuss this more—" "No," Mason cut him off, turning to his father. "You've had it out for me ever since the accident. You blame me for what happened, don't you?" Victor's eyes narrowed, a flicker of pain flashing across his face before his steely composure returned. "This isn't about the accident," he said, his tone colder than ever. "This is about you proving you're not just a spoiled brat who's never worked for anything in your life. Consider this your last chance to show me you're serious about the family legacy." Mason laughed bitterly, throwing up his hands. "Huh, and if I don't jump through your hoops, then what then? You'd rather give everything away to strangers and let me have it?" Victor leaned forward slightly, his voice low but cutting. "If you can't meet this simple condition, then yes, because I won't leave the Prescott legacy in the hands of someone who refuses to grow up." Mason felt his chest tighten, his father's words cutting deeper than he wanted to admit. He turned away, staring out at the window at the sprawling estate that had been his home and prison for as long as he could remember. "I don't need your money," he said finally, his voice quieter but still laced with defiance. "I can walk away from all of this and be just fine." Victor chuckled, a cold, mirthless sound. "Huh, then do it. Walk away. But we both know you won't, because deep down, you care about this family and its legacy more than you're willing to admit." Mason said nothing, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. Mr. Aldridge glanced between the two men, clearly uncomfortable. "Mason, you have 7 days to make your decision. If you choose to proceed, I recommend taking an action immediately." With that, the lawyer closed his folder and excused himself, leaving father and son in intense silence. Later that evening, Mason sat in his study, nursing a glass of whiskey as he recounted the day's events to his best friend, Ethan. "This whole thing is a joke," Mason muttered, running a hand through his dark hair. "How am I supposed to find someone to marry in 7 days?" Ethan, lounging on the couch with a casual smirk, shrugged. "Well, you've got money, charm, well, sort of, and access to pretty much anyone. It's not impossible." Mason shot him a withering look. "I'm not buying a wife, Ethan. This isn't a business transaction." Okay, fair enough," Ethan said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. Then a mischievous glint appeared in his eyes. "What about blind dates?" Mason groaned. "Ugh, you can't be serious." "Think about it," Ethan said, leaning forward. "We set up a few dates with women who might actually like you. Crazy, I know. And you only need one. Yes. Worst case, you get good stories out of it. Best case, you find someone who doesn't hate your guts." Mason swirled his drink, considering the idea. It was ridiculous, desperate, and completely out of his comfort zone. But as the weight of the ultimatum loomed over him, he realized he didn't have many options. "Fine," he said reluctantly. "Set it up. But if it does go south, I'm blaming you." Ethan grinned, raising his glass in mock toast. "Don't worry, buddy. By the end of this, you'll be thanking me." Mason drank his whiskey, the tension in his chest momentarily easing. He had no idea what he was getting himself into. But one thing was certain, the next 7 days were about to change his life in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. The quiet of the mansion at night was almost suffocating. Mason Prescott sat alone in his study, a glow of a single desk lamp illuminating stacks of unopened mail and business documents that had been accumulated over the months. The room was heavy with the scent of leather and aged wood, but Mason found no comfort in its familiar opulence. He stared into his glass of whiskey, watching the amber liquid catch the light. His father's words was earlier echoed in his mind, each one sharper than the last. "You're a spoiled brat. You've had years to prove yourself. This is your last chance." The anger that had burned so fiercely during their confrontation had dimmed, leaving behind a hollow ache. Victor Prescott had always been a demanding man, but the accident 10 years ago had hardened him into someone nearly unrecognizable. It was a rainy night, and they had argued about something he couldn't even remember now. His father had insisted on driving himself and lost control of the car. Mason only suffered minor injuries, but Mr. Victor was never able to walk again. Since that day, he had felt that no matter what he did, it was never enough for his father, and though he hated to admit it, his father's opinion still mattered to him. The next morning, Ethan barged into Mason's study with a usual carefree energy, carrying a tablet and a mischievous grin. "All right, buddy," Ethan announced, plopping down on the couch. "Operation Find a Wife is officially underway." Mason looked up from his desk, already regretting his decision to involve his best friend. "This feels like a terrible idea." "Well, it's not like you have a lot of options," Ethan retorted, scrolling through his tablet. "Unless you plan to start speed dating at the nearest coffee shop, this is as good as it gets." Ethan had enlisted the help of a high-end matchmaking service, promising to filter out the gold diggers and focus on women who might genuinely connect with Mason. But as the first few dates unfolded, it became clear that reality was far messier than Ethan's optimism. The first date was with Veronica, a socialite with impeccable style and a laugh that grated on Mason's nerves within minutes. She spent the evening talking about her designer wardrobe and upcoming vacations, pausing only to ask Mason pointed questions about his net worth. "So, Mason," Veronica purred, twirling her wine glass, "how many cars do you own? And do you prefer penthouse or private villas?" The second day wasn't much better. Lindsay, an inspiring influencer, spent more times taking selfies and filming their dinner than actually speaking to Mason. "This is so fun," Lindsay exclaimed, holding her phone out for a selfie. "Smile, Mason! My followers are going to love this." Mason barely resisted the urge to groan. By the time the fourth date rolled around, Mason was ready to give up entirely. Each encounter felt more transactional than the last, a painful reminder that many people only saw his wealth, not the man behind it. Late that evening, Mason and Ethan sat in the living room, the remnants of Chinese takeout scattered on the coffee table. Okay, I'll admit it, Ethan said, leaning back with a sheepish grin. Maybe this hasn't gone as smoothly as I thought. Mason glared at him. Understatement of the century. If I have to listen to one more person ask about my bank account, I'm out. Ethan held up his hands in mock surrender. Relax. I've got one more setup for you, and I promise she's not like the others. Mason raised an eyebrow, skeptical. How do you know? Because, Ethan said, his tone uncharacteristically serious. She doesn't even know who you are. No background checks, no fancy introductions, just a normal blind date. Think of this as your last shot. Mason sighed, running a hand through his hair. He hated how desperate this made him feel. But the thought of walking away from his inheritance, and more importantly, his father's respect, was unbearable. All right, he said finally. One more, but if this goes south, I'm done. Ethan grinned, clapping him on the shoulder. You won't regret it. Mason wasn't so sure. As he stared out the window at the sprawling estate, a sense of dread settled in his chest. He couldn't shake the feeling that the next few days would change everything, for better or worse. In her room, Harper Carter adjusted the hem of her simple navy blue dress and glanced at her reflection in the mirror. Her auburn hair framed her face in soft waves, and her green eyes held a mix of curiosity and apprehension. She sighed, grabbing her coat from the back of the chair. Layla, her roommate, spun around in her desk chair with a mischievous grin. No, this is an adventure, Layla corrected. It's a blind date. Think of it as research. You work with people all day. You're practically an expert. Research? Harper raised an eyebrow. I'm a social worker, not a case study subject. And you're the one who signed me up for this. Blind dates are so awkward. Layla shrugged, unbothered. Well, you've been single for way too long, and I'm tired of hearing you talk about work all the time. Go have fun. Worst case scenario, you get a free coffee and an awkward story to tell. Harper rolled her eyes but couldn't help smiling at her roommate's enthusiasm. Fine. At the cafe, Mason sat at a small table in the corner, sipping his coffee and scrolling through his phone. He glanced up at the clock on the wall, irritated by how slowly the minutes passed. Blind dates weren't his idea of a good time, but Ethan had insisted, and Mason was too worn down to argue. When the bell above the door chimed, Mason looked up, expecting another polished, overly styled woman with an agenda. Instead, he saw Harper. She paused at the entrance, her eyes scanning the room before settling on him. Her modest dress, sensible shoes, and warm but assuming demeanor were a stark contrast to the woman Mason had met before. Harper approached the table, offering a polite smile. Mason? Just Mason, he replied, standing to shake her hand. Her grip was firm, her gaze steady, not flirtatious, not calculating, just normal. I'm Harper, she said, taking a seat. They ordered drinks, and the conversation started awkwardly. Mason studied her, trying to figure out her angle. She wasn't fawning over him or trying to impress him, which made him oddly curious. After a moment of silence, he leaned back and smirked. Let me guess, you're here for the money too? Harper raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. Excuse me? If I wanted money, I'd be at a job interview, not a blind date. Mason blinked, caught off guard by her sharp response. I didn't mean... Sure you did, Harper interrupted, her tone light but pointed. And you clearly have a high opinion of yourself. Great start. For the first time in a while, Mason found himself at a loss for words. Most people would have laughed nervously or tried to explain themselves, but Harper seemed entirely unbothered. Okay, I deserve that, he admitted, running a hand through his hair. I'm not exactly a pro at this whole dating thing. That's obvious, Harper said, her lips curving into a small teasing smile. Despite himself, Mason chuckled. Fair enough. So what's your deal? Why'd you agree to this? Harper shrugged. My roommate thought it would be fun, she said. She thinks I spend too much time working and not enough time living. What do you do? Mason asked. I'm a social worker, she said. I help connect families to resources, advocate for foster kids, that sort of thing. Mason raised an eyebrow, impressed despite himself. That sounds exhausting. It can be, Harper admitted, taking a sip of her coffee. But it's worth it. What about you? Mason hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. I'm in business, he said vaguely. Harper's eyes narrowed slightly, sensing his evasion, but she let it slide. As the conversation continued, Mason found himself lowering his guard. Harper wasn't like the others. She didn't interrupt to talk about herself or drop hints about his wealth. Instead, she asked thoughtful questions, listened intently, and even made him laugh with her dry wit. For her part, Harper was intrigued by the glimpses of vulnerability she saw in Mason. Beneath his polished exterior and guarded tone, there was something raw, something human. She sensed that he carried a weight he didn't know how to let go of, and it made her curious despite herself. After nearly an hour, Harper glanced at her watch and stood, grabbing her coat. Leaving already? Mason asked, surprised by the pang of disappointment he felt. I have an early morning, Harper said, her tone polite but firm. She hesitated for a moment, then looked him in the eye. You're not what I expected, but I'm not sure that's a good thing. Before Mason could respond, she was gone, the door chiming softly behind her. He sat there for a moment, staring after her. Her words played in his mind, a challenge wrapped in mystery. For the first time in a long time, Mason felt something other than cynicism. He felt intrigued. Harper Carter stood by the counter of the community center where she worked, shifting through a pile of paperwork. The facility was woefully underfunded, and she spent most of her evenings strategizing ways to secure grants or donors. It was a never-ending battle, but one she fought willingly. The bell on the center's front door jinged, pulling her from her thoughts. She looked up and froze. Mason Prescott stood there, looking distinctly out of place in his tailored suit and polished shoes. Mason? She said, surprised. What are you doing here? He hesitated for a moment, as if unsure how to start, before walking toward her with determined steps. I need to talk to you, he said. Harper folded her arms, her eyebrows raised. About what? Another blind date etiquette lesson? Mason winced but pressed on. I know this is going to sound crazy, but hear me out. She sighed, leaning against the counter. I'm listening. Mason took a deep breath, clearly uncomfortable. I need your help. My father's lawyer dropped this ridiculous condition on me. I have to be married within a week to secure my inheritance. Harper's expression turned skeptical. And this involves me how? I want you to marry me, he said plainly. The room fell silent. Harper blinked, then let out a disbelieving laugh. I'm sorry, what? It's not as bad as it sounds, Mason said quickly. It would just be for a year, no strings attached. I know you have student loans to pay off and need a large sum for the community center. I'll take care of it. Consider it a mutually beneficial deal. Harper stared at him, incredulous. You think you can just buy people's lives because you're rich? No, thank you. It's not just about money, Mason said, his voice quieter now. I need someone I can trust, and for some reason, I think that's you. Harper opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She wasn't sure what stunned her more, his audacity or the vulnerability she saw in his eyes. You're serious, she said finally. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't, Mason replied. Look, I know this is unconventional, but it's a win-win. You get the funding you need, and I get to keep my inheritance. Harper shook her head, stepping away from him. This isn't a business deal, Mason. Marriage it's personal. It's sacred. You can't just throw money at it, expecting everything to work out. I know it's not ideal, Mason said, frustration creeping into his voice, but I'm running out of options, and I think we can make this work for both of us. Harper stared at him for a long moment before responding, her voice firm. I'm sorry, Mason. The answer is no. That evening, Harper sat on the couch in her apartment, recounting the bizarre encounter with Lila. He offered to pay off my loans and fund the center, Harper said, still shaking her head in disbelief. All I have to do is marry him for a year. Layla leaned forward, her eyes wide. And you said no? Of course I did, Harper replied. It's insane. Marriage isn't supposed to be some transactional arrangement. Layla tilted her head, her expressions thoughtful. I get that, but think about what you could do with that money. The center could finally expand. You could help so many more people. Harper frowned, conflicted. But at what cost? Selling my integrity? It's not like he's asking you to actually fall in love with him, Layla pointed out. It's just a year, and for what you said, he's not a bad guy. A little arrogant, maybe, but not awful. Harper sighed, resting her head in her hands. She couldn't deny that the offer was tempting. Her financial struggles were a constant weight on her shoulders, and the thought of being able to make real, lasting change in her community was hard to ignore. I don't know, she said finally. It just feels wrong. Layla placed a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to decide right now, but think about it. This could be the opportunity you've been waiting for. The next day, Harper found herself walking the familiar path to the community center, Mason's words still echoing in her mind. When she arrived, she was greeted by the usual chaos, kids running around, parents signing up for programs, and volunteers rushing to meet demands. As she sat at her desk, staring at the glowing stack of unpaid bills, she made a decision. Later that evening, Harper met Mason at a small, quiet restaurant. He looked surprised to see her, but quickly masked it with his usual calm demeanor. Changed your mind? He asked. I have conditions, Harper said, cutting straight to the point. Mason leaned back, intrigued. I'm listening. No physical intimacy, Harper said firmly. Complete honesty, and this ends after a year. No extensions, no complications. Mason nodded. Agreed. And, she added, her eyes narrowing, I want everything in writing. No loopholes. Done, Mason said, pulling out his phone. I'll have my lawyer draft something tonight. Harper took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. I still think this is crazy, she admitted. Mason smiled faintly. Probably, but sometimes crazy works. The next day, they signed the agreement in the presence of lawyer. As Harper walked out of the office, the weight of her decision settled over her. This is just a deal, she told herself, nothing more. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't predict, and neither could Mason. The days after their marriage were a whirlwind of adjustments. Harper moved into Mason's sprawling townhouse, and while the house itself was immaculate, their arrangement was anything but. The first morning, Harper walked into the sleek, modern kitchen to find Mason pouring coffee, dressed in a tailored suit. He glanced up briefly. Good morning, he said, his tone polite but distant. Morning, Harper replied, equally reserved. The silence stretched as they awkwardly navigated sharing this space. For the next few weeks, their conversations were transactional, revolving around schedules, public appearances, and the mechanics of their agreement. This isn't so bad, Harper joked one evening as they sat across from each other at the dining table, eating takeout. Not yet, Mason replied with a weary smile. Wait until the press gets wind of it. They shared a small laugh, but the walls between them remained firmly in place. One night, Harper found Mason in his office, staring at a framed photo of his father. She hesitated at the door before stepping in. You okay? She asked gently. Mason glanced at her, his expressions conflicted. I was just thinking, my dad wasn't always like this. Before the accident, he was different. Harper sat down across from him, her gaze steady. Have you ever told him that? Mason frowned. What's the point? He doesn't listen. Maybe he would, Harper suggested. Or maybe it's just something you need to say for yourself. Her words lingered in Mason's mind long after she left the room. The next day, he visited Victor. Their conversation was tense but revealing. For the first time in years, Mason began to see his father as more than just a critical voice, but as a man shaped by his own pain and regrets. Harper, meanwhile, poured herself into her work, balancing her responsibilities at the community center with her new role as Mason's wife. Though she kept her personal life private, her passion for helping others drew Mason's attention. One evening, he accompanied her to a fundraiser for the community center. Harper stood at the podium, addressing a crowd of donors with a mix of poise and fervor. These children need more than just a roof over their heads, she said, her voice steady. They need hope, opportunities, and people who believe in them. Together, we can give them a future worth fighting for. As the crowd erupted into applause, Mason felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest. He had always seen Harper as a pragmatic and independent, but now he realized how deeply she cared for others, and how much he admired her for it. Later, as they mingled with the guests, Harper accidentally spilled a glass of champagne on Mason's jacket. "Oh no!" she exclaimed, grabbing a napkin. "I'm so sorry." Mason laughed, surprising her. "It's fine. I've survived worse." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the noise of the room faded away. Harper felt her cheeks flush, and Mason's expression softened. "You're amazing. You know that?" he said quietly. Harper opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, they were interrupted by another guest. Still, the moment lingered in both their minds. In a short time, as he saw their relationship deepen, Mr. Victor grew suspicious. He hired a private investigator who soon uncovered the truth about their arrangement. One evening, Mason returned from a meeting with Victor, his face pale and his jaws tight. Harper was in the living room, ready, and looked up in concern. "What happened?" she asked. "He knows," Mason said bluntly. Harper's heart sank. "How?" "Private investigator," Mason replied, running a hand through his hair. "He thinks I manipulated you into this. He doesn't believe us." Harper stared at him, her emotions swirling. "What did you say?" Mason turned to her, his eyes earnest. "I told him the truth, that I cared about you, that this might have started as a deal, but it's not just that anymore." Harper felt her breath catch. "Mason!" Before she could say more, Mason crossed the room and took her hands in his. "I know this wasn't what either of us expected," he said softly, "but I'm not pretending anymore. I don't want to lose you." Harper's eyes filled with tears, but before she could respond, Mason's phone buzzed. It was Victor. "You better prove it," Victor's voice came through, gruff and skeptical. "Because if she's the one, you can't afford to mess this up." Mason ended the call, his resolve hardening. "He doesn't believe in us, and I don't care. I just need to know one thing. Do you?" Harper hesitated, her heart pounding. She didn't answer right away, leaving Mason with the unsettling realization that, for the first time in his life, he was truly vulnerable. After a moment, Harper looked Mason straight in the eyes and said, "Mason, from the beginning, this really was just a transaction." Mason's shoulders slumped, and for a moment, he looked as if he might give up. But then he stepped closer, his voice quiet but firm. "I was a fool," he admitted. "I treated our marriage like a business deal because I was scared. Scared of failing. Scared of my father. Scared of you." "Me?" Harper asked, incredulous. "Yes, you," Mason said, his voice breaking slightly. You're everything I'm not. Selfless, passionate, real. I don't know how to handle that. So I hid behind the deal. But I'm not hiding anymore." Harper's breath caught, but she didn't respond, her emotions swirling too fast to pin down. The next morning, Mason sat in his father's study, the tension between them thick. "Well?" Victor asked, his piercing gaze fixed on his son. Mason straightened his shoulders. "I love her," he said simply. "And I don't care what the will says. I'm not letting her go." Victor was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the desk. "What's this?" Mason asked, frowning. "Read it," Victor said. Mason opened the folder, scanning the document inside. His eyes widened as he reached the bottom. "The inheritance was never at risk?" Mason said, disbelief coloring his voice. Victor nodded, his expression softening. "It was a test, Mason. Not about money or marriage, but about you. I needed to know if you can grow up, take responsibility, and care about something, or someone, other than yourself." Mason clenched his fist, torn between anger and gratitude. "So you manipulated me. Us." Victor's gaze didn't waver. "And it worked, didn't it? You proved me wrong. Now go prove yourself to her." That evening, Harper arrived at the community center to find it transformed. The draped walls were adorned with string lights, and tables filled with flowers lined the room. Children from the center ran around excitedly, and the staff greeted her with knowing smiles. "What's going on?" Harper asked, confused. "Come and see," Layla said, appearing at her side and guiding her toward the main hall. There, standing under the canopy of lights, was Mason, holding a small velvet box. He looked nervous but determined as she approached. "Harper?" he began, his voice steady despite the emotions in his eyes. "Our first deal was a mistake. I treated you like a solution to my problem, and I was wrong. You're not a deal. You're my heart, my future, my everything." Harper felt tears welling up but didn't speak, letting him continue. "I don't deserve you, and I'm asking anyway," Mason said, dropping to one knee. "Let's make a deal. One forever. Will you marry me for real this time?" Harper stared at him, her heart pounding. She took a deep breath, her lips trembling into a smile. "You don't have to buy me, Mason," she said softly. "You already have me." The room erupted in cheers as she reached down to pull him to his feet, their embrace warm and full of promise. Months later, the community center was packed for their wedding. Friends, family, and the people Harper had worked so hard to help filled the room, their joy palpable. Victor, seated at the head table, raised his glass during the toast. "To my son, Mason, and my new daughter, Harper," he began, his voice uncharacteristically warm. "Mason, you've shown me that you're not just capable, you're extraordinary. And Harper, thank you for teaching us what it means to love selflessly." As glasses clinked and laughter filled the room, Mason and Harper shared a quiet moment on the dance floor. "Do you think your dad finally approves?" Harper teased. Mason smiled, spinning her gently. "All that matters is you." As they danced under the glow of the lights, surrounded by love and laughter, they knew they had found something far greater than any inheritance, each other. Life often surprises us, taking us on journeys we never expected. Mason and Harper's story reminds us of the transformative power of love, trust, and second chances. What started as contract became something real, proving that when we open our hearts, anything is possible. If this story touched you, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who loves stories of hope and redemption. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales that reminds us of the beauty of life and love. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.